Okay, I'm going to start out being very vulnerable. I didn't want to write this sermon this week. I picked this topic back in July, and then after the preaching for asking for help, I was pretty stymied as to what to say today, because pretty much vulnerability is the core of asking for help, and I'd already told you about Brene Brown, and I just didn't know what else I could say that would be interesting. And then I looked at the title again, Vulnerable Change. And I looked at our monthly theme, Power, and I remembered that the reason I chose this topic for this month is because vulnerability is more than needing help. Vulnerability is also present in offering help. If we are to create change, if we are to make this strange, hard, crazy world better for everyone, we have to be willing to see our own vulnerabilities. We have to be willing to face our fears and be open to that change. Let's think for a minute about change. So there are two ways that people generally react to change. There are two extremes. One is someone who relies on stability. Their reaction is often, I don't want to change, I don't want the situation to change, I'm happy the way I am, and I'm happy with things the way they are now. This viewpoint is usually based on fear. If things change, then I might be worse off than I am right now. Another way change is often experienced is from someone who enjoys the excitement of new things. This reaction to change often is like, cool, I wonder how this change will shape my life differently. People who react this way are more resilient than people who react with fear. Okay, so in one of my classes last year, a visiting scholar came to speak with us about putting together a ritual with the possibility of leaving open portions for improvisation. And we began the class with an exercise that involved the group reading a piece of scripture aloud, but without any pre-assigned parts, without any guidance as to when to start or when to stop or when to start again. We were all to read a part of it aloud and allow what was to happen. She explained to us that if 4 people read the same part at the same time, or if there was a long time of silence, that was the way the scripture wanted to be read. Most of us were pretty hesitant and confused and were uncomfortable with this process in the beginning. But once it got going, and suddenly 3 people spoke out, and then another person decided to reread the same part of the passage that spoke to them, and then the silence rang out. That felt like a holy process. She had taught us something about being open to change, being flexible to the unknown, and she taught us the beauty of letting go of anxiety. This lesson, and particularly this further statement I'll tell you in a minute, really taught me something that I've been carrying with me ever since. She asked us, what do you think the opposite of anxiety is? And we answered with a variety of words, as probably you're thinking of some right now, like calm and acceptance. And her response was, the opposite of anxiety is curiosity. Anxiety is, oh no, what's going to happen? And curiosity is, oh yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. Anxiety is thinking about the outcome of events, imagining the worst, and curiosity is thinking of the outcome of events and imagining the best. Reacting with curiosity is one outcome of resilience. And resilience only comes when we're willing to be vulnerable to outcomes beyond our control. In order to embrace positive change, we need to be willing to have bad things happen. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? It sounds like we're just going to open the front door and invite everyone into our house, no matter who they are, even if they want to steal our things or hurt us. It sounds like publishing an ad in the paper. Come by my house and steal all my stuff. I'll be home between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. if you want to come hurt me too. It feels like being helpless and scared and open to all the pain we're trying to avoid in our life. But being vulnerable is not being helpless. Vulnerability is not being weak or worthless. We are all vulnerable, whether we hide it behind a mask or show it to the world. We are all vulnerable. It's only those people who are willing to accept their vulnerability who are able to be resilient. Say you had a bad fall on the ice while skating as a kid. And now that you're all grown up, your friend takes you to a skate rink and all you can think about is that you're going to fall down. So you hold on to the side and you inch along, barely moving, and all you do is worry. And you're so scared that you can't even have fun. So assume you've been working on this vulnerability stuff for a while and realize your fear is getting in the way of having a good time. So you have a couple of choices. You could quit skating and leave your friend and never go back. Or you could ask for help. You could find someone to take your hand and go with you around the rink a couple times. Or you could accept the inevitability of falling and throw yourself to the ice to get it over with. If falling is the worst that could happen, wouldn't intentionally falling make it less scary? Wouldn't you now be able to get up and say, gosh, if that's all it is? And then, wouldn't you then be able to skate around the rink a couple times and see that actually it's kind of fun and maybe you're kind of good at it, and maybe you realize that that is resilience. Bouncing back from a fall, getting back on the horse, brushing yourself off and saying, gosh, what's the worst that could happen? We've been taught to fear a lot of things in this life. That there isn't enough to go around, not enough food or housing or money, especially not enough love. That if we aren't perfect, we aren't worthy of connection and love. We've been taught to fear that people will take advantage of us if they know we have weakness. And so we shore up our weaknesses and vulnerability by building walls and keeping secrets. We all have our different ways of keeping people out. Maybe you act like you're better than everyone, or maybe you act like you're happy and pleasant all the time, or maybe you just don't reach out to people pretending that everything's okay, really, when you're hurting. And sure, these really are helpful tools for some situations, but the problem is that we can't hide who we are and connect in a real way. If you only ever show people the mask that you wear, you will never ever trust that people love you, the real you. Back in September, after I preached my Asking for Help sermon, several people came up to me and told me about the Johari window. I bet many of you have heard of it, and probably many of you have done the exercise yourself. You're given a list of adjectives, maybe about 60 or so, and you pick 5 or 6 that you feel describe you. And then other folks that you know pick 5 or 6 that they think describe you. And then the results are divided into 4 quadrants. The top half are the words that other people have chosen for you, and the bottom half is the words that you've chosen for yourself. And the left half, your left half, is the words that you've used to describe yourself, and the right half are words you didn't use to describe yourself. So 2 of these quadrants are interesting and relevant to today. The top right quadrant, known as the blind spot, and the bottom left quadrant, known as the hidden area or facade. In the blind spot are often words that describe how people see you that you don't see yourself. And it sounds scary, but usually those words are very, very good words. They're positive adjectives. When we're closed and afraid, we often become overly critical of ourselves and don't see the many good things that we have to offer. Now, the hidden or facade quadrant is usually the one that is brought up when you're talking about vulnerability. This is the quadrant where there are things that you say about yourself that others don't see. This is the quadrant with the most room to grow. There are things in there that we use to hide our vulnerability, and there are things in there that we are hiding in our vulnerability. These are the things we don't want other people to see. So we create a facade, a mask that we put on to cover our flaws, a wall that we put up to keep out the pain. But here's the rub. Shutting out hurt also shuts out happiness. Avoiding pain means also avoiding joy. We can't pick and choose. The only way to experience real love is to be open to experiencing real hurt. The only way to change is to face our fears. Vulnerability is coming out from behind your mask and feeling the power of your authenticity. In his book, Barefoot Doctor's Guide to the Tao, a spiritual handbook for the urban warrior, author Stephen Russell says, vulnerability is the only authentic state. Being vulnerable means being open for wounding, but also for pleasure. Being open to the wounds of life means also being open to the bounty and beauty. Don't mask or deny your vulnerability. It is your greatest asset. Be vulnerable. Quake and shake in your boots with it. It is your greatest asset. The new goodness that is coming to you in the form of people and situations and things can only come to you when you are vulnerable. We've been taught that showing vulnerability is weakness, but really showing vulnerability is power. Power is more than building walls or wielding weapons. Power can be allowing someone else to understand who you are. Power is hearing who another person is and connecting to them. Power is to see the suffering of others and choosing to recognize that it could happen to you at any time and moving forward anyway. Power is saying, I've been hurt and I will be hurt again, and I choose to remain open to what life brings me. It takes a lot of strength to live that way. It takes a lot of courage. There's so much that can happen to us in this strange, hard, crazy world. There is so much suffering, so many disasters waiting for us right around the corner. If we let our fear run the show, we are likely to stick our head in the ground anytime we get a whiff of anything that might upset us. This may be why so many people don't do anything about the environment or homelessness or social justice of any kind. It's too big, too hard, and too scary to look at the suffering and imagine that it could happen to me. I don't want to face the people who remind me of the fact that I could lose everything and be destitute and living on the street. I don't want to face the fact that we as a country have effectively abandoned the poor. We as a culture have become so fixated on scarcity that even in owning a home and having thousands of dollars in savings, it doesn't feel like enough to keep us safe. How can we give money or time or resources to anyone else if we don't feel like we have enough? According to Brené Brown in her book, Daring Greatly, worrying about scarcity is our culture's version of post-traumatic stress. It happens when we've been through too much, and rather than coming together to heal, which requires vulnerability, we're angry and scared and at each other's throats. We've abandoned vulnerability and each other in order to save ourselves. The truth of the matter is, though, we can't save ourselves. We're all in this together. So we have to stick together in order to make anything better. We have to start with our own vulnerability. We've got to be willing to see how vulnerable we are. We have to be able to start to live from that vulnerability. When we put up walls between ourselves and the people we need to help, we can't connect with them in a real way. We can't empathize with them, and we can't make real change. Antoinette Tuft, the school administrator in Georgia who talked a gunman out of shooting anyone, is an example of strength. She stood strong, not letting the gunman any further into the school than her desk, and she showed courage when she shared her vulnerability with the man pointing a gun at her. Antoinette showed the gunman that she was hurting too, that she understood that life sucks, and that the only way to make it through is together. As the poet Chris Jami says, to share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable, and to make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Antoinette saved lives by showing her vulnerability, and in her vulnerability, she showed her strength. We all have vulnerabilities, and we all have inner strength. We all can make a difference in this world, but if we really want to make changes, we've got to face our part in the problem. Facing your own fault is a huge and scary act of vulnerability. Looking at the ways you've inadvertently played a part in society that is broken can shake you down to the foundation. But facing that vulnerability makes it possible to move forward. Not that long ago, I was shaken by my experience taking a class on exploring white privilege. I sat in a room with many other people and realized that my assumptions I make about the world are not true necessarily for people of color. I feel like the world is a generally safe place. I know that I can find people who look like me to be surrounded with any time of day, any time of the week. I really took these things for granted. So starting in February, Betsy Day and I will be co-facilitating a class on white privilege here at FUS. And if you're interested in exploring what it means for you to be white or what it means for white people to hold privilege, I encourage you to come. It might shake you down to the foundation. There will also be a white privilege conference here in Madison in the end of March for those who wish to delve even deeper into what it means to explore race and privilege. And in the light of the recent Race to Equity report completed here in Dane County, Madison is ready for this conference. Moving to Madison was an interesting experience. Having lived in racially diverse neighborhoods in both San Diego and Manhattan, I was used to seeing many people of color in my life. I've heard from lots of people about how wonderful Madison is, and I was so delighted to find out that they were right. This is a wonderful town, doing wonderful things. And I found that this city feels comfortable to me. But what I've realized after being here for a while, and to my chagrin, was that the reason that I found it comfortable is that it's a largely white city. Most of the neighborhoods I've been to feel very upper middle class, and I was completely shocked that I was feeling this way. I felt like I'd bought into all that propaganda that white people are safe and people of color are dangerous, and I felt like I'd betrayed my own belief that I was a good person working toward the goal of ending racism. I had to open myself up to discomfort and admit to myself. And I had to open myself up to vulnerability to admit this to you. The first principle of the Rebel Heart Manifesto is to stand firm in our own vulnerability and tenderness, and the second principle is to be willing to stretch our own comfort zone in order to create change. So here I am, standing in front of you, sharing my vulnerability and pushing the limits of my discomfort. I hope you will choose to do the same. Like Yang Mei Oi, I am still a work in progress. I still have to be open and vulnerable to finding out new things about myself. I still have to find small ways to be rebellious and create change, even if it's only in myself. Tomorrow, I might find my way to making change in a more rebellious way. Tomorrow, we might use our vulnerability to change the world.